Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Carefulist, the podcast. I'm Katie Christophic, your host. And today we are really happy to welcome Dr. Cheri Hampton-Farmer, who is the CEO of Communicating Matters. Welcome to the show, Cheri.
Thank you, Katie. I'm happy to be here.
I am really looking forward to today's conversation because you touch on some really important concepts that we don't talk about very often on this show. So, with that in mind, let's dive in and start from the very beginning. Why don't you share your caregiving story with us?
Oh, all right. Well, my caregiving journey actually began when I was in graduate school, and I was doing research on caregivers of loved ones with Alzheimer's. It was a project as a research assistant. My director was working on research and wanting to find out as much as she could about caregiver needs. We focus a lot on how to treat the patient, but we seldom think about, or at that time, seldom thought about the actual caregiver. And so I learned two very important things during this process. I interviewed a number of people who had been caregivers or were at the time being caregivers. And even in the research, I learned that one, people who have a diagnosis want information first. And
Mhm.
secondly, they want social support. So those were the two biggest ahas moments that I had. I realized that there's a craving for information. And when social support looked a little bit like many of the interviewees would say that they would just love to have someone come and sit with them and share a meal. They just wanted company. Secondly, they had to withdraw from many social groups because their duties had increased. And then finally, some caregivers were even criticized by other family members when the family members weren't around very often. And
Mhm.
so we saw a big need for social support for caregivers, but also arming them with as much information as possible. So in that research, it just gave me an awareness of what people needed in caregiving. And at that time, I'd never planned to be a caregiver, never knew how this would come into my own life.
Yeah.
But as I would talk to people who were starting their journey with loved ones with Alzheimer's or dementia, I would share a few things that I thought might be helpful. And I was also more sensitive to the needs of needing social support. So that's where my
Right.
journey began.
Oh, well, and it's such an interesting introduction to that world, right? Especially when you're very young. Of course, you're not thinking about caregiving. That is not something that crosses your mind, particularly at that age, but then especially it's hard to envision yourself being older and having to take that on. Um, so I'm curious then how that has sort of, informed your personal experience later in life as a caregiver.
Right. So as my mother's health declined, one of the things that, again, my background is communication. That's how I help people. That's what I do with my business, Communicating Matters. And I realized that that social support was really important. And living 7.5 hours away, 7.5 hour car drive away from where my folks lived in Maryland, I realized I couldn't be there to be a caregiver, but I just realized I could offer social support over the phone and I could make more frequent visits. And so I kept that in mind that that social support was so important and just listening to what needs were and also being the daughter who was away, I realized since I couldn't be there, I could listen. And sometimes I would know things that the sisters who lived in town didn't know, just because
Yep.
I was on the phone almost every day talking to one of my parents, trying to find out what's going on and just checking in with them. So I think that's what I took away. One important lesson was just, being there for social support.
Yeah. Well, and caregiving long distance has its own challenges, right? And I was in that role myself within my family. My family was local and I was the one who was away. Um, so that communication and those phone calls, as you said, they really can bring up information that don't happen in that daily visit, or the routine of, well, we're just going to do your meds real quick and then I have to be on my way to do whatever. When you're
Yeah.
having that phone call, information comes up, or challenges or questions, or, yeah, I had a little trouble with whatever
Yeah.
today, and the local family doesn't know.
Right.
um so I'm curious, when that would happen, how did you share that information with your local siblings? How did those conversations go?
Well, we also had the phone call train going on, and I would call and say, "Hey, did you know this was going on?" Well, no,
Yeah,
I didn't hear. They didn't tell me that. And again, I think, my parents were a little bit private, so they were
yeah.
careful about sharing too much. And just
Mhm.
I'm a listener and empathetic, and I just sometimes pull things out of people without them knowing they're sharing a great deal. So I think
Right.
sometimes it just came out because of those routine phone calls. And like you said, it was different than the daily routines of here are your meds and what do you need from the grocery store and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So yes, I would share that either through text messaging or through a phone call and just make sure everybody was aware of what
yeah.
was going on. And I
Wow.
think, too, one of the things we were concerned about is later on, as my mother's health declined more, my father was assuming all of the duties. So he was assuming the house cleaning and the cooking and the med dispensing and
Mhm.
doctor's visits and all of that. So we became very concerned about his health and wanted to make sure, since he was the primary caregiver, that we were taking care of him as well. And so part of those conversations were, how's dad doing? And, are you going to see your doctor? Are you getting to your appointments? And making sure he was okay. So one of my initiatives was to make more frequent trips home and stay
Mhm.
there for longer periods of time so that I could just take over for my dad and just say, go
Right.
do for 3 or 4 days. You just go do what you need to do just to recover, just to refresh yourself. And so we saw that as an important part of caregiving also. At that time, my mother was very mobile. She could get out and loved to get out. And I had the time. So when I was there, I would just take her to places she wanted to go. Maybe other people didn't want to take her, and
Yeah.
just let her spend the kind of time she wanted to, whether it was in a store or um, whatever activity she wanted to do. But we needed to take care of him so that he was okay to take care of her.
Yeah. Well, and that is key,
Mhm.
right? Because that whole dynamic shifts if something happens to the primary
Right.
caregiver. And it also gives you a window into their day-to-day life by being there for a number of days and staying with them. You can see things that go unsaid, and then, have your sidebar conversations with your siblings like, well, I don't know that this should be happening. We have to talk about this.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And it also gave me a little bit more insight to some of the tensions that happen
Mhm.
between spouses and other family members. So, one
Mhm.
example of that was I was home and um, I could tell there was a lot of stress on my dad.
Mhm.
And, he was just assuming everything and just right in there. And I don't know that he was aware of how stressful this was for him. But
Mhm.
I noticed my mother, I said, okay, here's the list. I've gotten everything done. Is there anything else you want me to do before I leave? And she said, well, I would love for you to wash those curtains. And if you could wash the windows, that would just be so helpful. And my dad just said, no, please don't do that. And so there was this little a tiff going between the two of them. And I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out where that was coming from because my dad was all about pleasing my mom. And I
Right.
wanted to please both of them. So I,
Yeah.
I didn't know which side to take. So I tried to decipher what was really going on. And I realized my dad did not want the disruption because if I wasn't able to finish the job because I needed to get on the road to go home, it would
Yes.
be left to him, and that would be one more duty. He didn't say that, but I inferred
Right.
that through questions and comments that he was making. So I
Yeah.
realized that disruption for either of them was
Hmm.
really critical. And he tried to preserve routine for her because she liked that routine.
Yep.
She didn't want any cleaners to come into her house.
Hmm.
So my dad had to do all of that because she didn't want that disruption. And at that time, I realized he didn't want me to wash the curtains. And so I got that job done really quickly, and washed the inside and outside of the windows, and she was thrilled. So I was very happy that I was able to make my mother happy
Hmm.
and fulfill and not disrupt my dad's life. But that was
Right.
another moment where I realized there are tensions and there's reason for it. And
Yep.
he was just carrying so much on his plate. And one more disruption just wasn't what he wanted at that time.
Right. Well, and you've just touched on two critical things. One is the routine, because
Mhm.
when you're a caregiver, there is so much to think about all the time that anything you can put on autopilot is self-preservation,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? So, and depending on what the person you're caring for is going through, that routine and that schedule can be critical because if their routine gets compromised, then everything falls apart.
Right. Yes.
So yeah, I mean that is definitely key. And the other thing that you mentioned um, is listening to how you can be helpful
Hmm.
because people won't necessarily come out and say, I need you to do this. Could you help me with this?
Hmm.
Sometimes, parents to children, they're a little bit more,
Yes.
a
Direct.
little
Yeah.
more open with it. But for folks who are listening and trying to figure out how you can be helpful to someone who is a caregiver, asking them, what can I do for you? Is just giving them one more thing to do.
Right.
So if you look around and you see something needs to be done, take into account what that routine is and whether you can finish it or not. Because
Mhm.
if you leave it to them, if you start something and leave it unfinished, it is not helpful. It's now one more thing they have to do.
Yes. Yes. That's so
Yeah.
true.
So while we're thinking about things that are helpful for you as a long distance caregiver, is there anything that someone did for you that you found helpful or supportive in your journey? Any
Um,
advice, anything like
yeah.
that?
Well, and so in my journey, again, I'm a researcher, so and as much information as I could gather, I wanted. So anyone who was willing, and there are all these privacy laws, so I couldn't get it directly from medical professionals. But as my
Mm,
parents allowed me more entry into their worlds and discussions with their medical professionals, that information was key for me. And so as far as advice, I don't know if it was advice more than I appreciated that information. And at one point, I met someone who just at a networking event, it works in development for hospice here in Fort Wayne. And
mm,
I just found her work so interesting. And at that time, I wasn't thinking about hospice. We had never had
mhm,
any dealings with hospice before. But she
mhm,
was just so interesting, and they do such good work here at Stillwater Hospice in Fort Wayne, where they actually now have programs for people who just to make them aware of what hospice needs could provide
mm.
way before you need them. Because
Yeah.
when you need them, you have to step in and it goes really fast, and you have to ask all these questions and gather information. So it was serendipitous that we met and that we
Yeah.
had these conversations about hospice because 3 months later, I was on the phone with the local hospice in my parents' community
Mhm,
saying, I need to know what the next steps are because I think we're approaching this.
mhm.
So I really appreciated it. At the time, she didn't know she was giving me advice, but it was
Yeah.
very helpful and it just prepared me for what was to come.
Oh, wow. That is so helpful. One of the themes that I have started to emerge on this show when we talk about hospice is not knowing when to engage them. And, people's general thought is, well, it's, a couple of days before someone passes, or it's a couple of weeks before someone passes, and trying to figure out what that timing is. And then knowing from a hospice perspective now, they want to talk to you 6 months prior.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so, how was your experience then working with hospice and their care? Were they, um,
They were
well,
wonderful.
I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
I'll ask
No,
your
they were
experience.
wonderful. So, again, after all this information I had gained from my friend, um, I called the local place. And again, I didn't think I didn't think we were ready to
Mhm.
even talk about it, but I thought I was doing things for my family. Now I realize that I didn't want them to have to do. It's like I'd
Yes.
already had this wonderful conversation. I knew this would be a hard conversation for them. So I thought
Hmm.
I'll talk to the local people because I know we're not there yet and it's
Right.
okay. And so as I talked to the local person, she told me the steps. I had all my questions prepared. I was taking notes. And
Hmm.
something really cool that happened, my mother was a reading teacher, and she asked me, did your mother work here? And I said, yes, she did. She said, my son had her as a teacher, and he
Oh
learned
my
to read.
gosh.
Yes, he learned to read under her. So again, another really
Um,
wonderful moment in the midst of all this trauma that was going on. But
yeah.
so, and then, once I think the timing of when we realized hospice was going to be the option, and again, we weren't making decisions for her. I was all about, Mom, these are your decisions, and I just want you to have the information you need. So she had talked to one of her doctors, and it looked like there was an operation that could have helped her, but there was an 80% chance, 85% chance she wouldn't survive. And so at
Oh.
that point, she realized, okay, that is my last option. And
Hmm.
I am just going to have to live out my life this way. And that's
Hmm.
when we started talking about hospice. And I said, Mom, here are the options. And you can get, I think the biggest support, the biggest draw for us to consider hospice. And like you said, they assured us, oh, some people live for 2 years under hospice
Hmm.
care. And,
Yeah.
I thought, oh, okay, because I thought too, it was just a day or two before, and
Right.
we definitely weren't ready for that. But realizing that we could get hospice support, and
Yes.
it was amazing the kind of support we had. First of all, they were a resource for all of our questions and
Mhm.
immediate because they were coming in routinely. We also noticed for our parents, it provided some social support. So my
Yeah.
mother was having routine people come in a couple of times a day, and one lady would just sit and talk with her or read to her, whatever that she wanted or needed, and I could just see her light up when that happened. My dad had a little bit of relief from caregiving duties for a short time,
Mhm.
or if he wanted to sit in and have a conversation, he could. That was social support for him. So, like
Right.
back to my need for knowledge and caregiver needs for social support, hospice was meeting that, and that exceeded my expectations. I can't say enough good things about hospice. Like I said, we've never had any interaction with hospice or had a need for it, and
Yeah.
they surpassed all of my expectations. They were incredible right up until the very end.
Well, I'm sorry you needed their services, but I'm glad you had them. And that was my family's experience as well. They were fantastic. And I know one of the things that my dad appreciated about it, um, and I am inferring he didn't say this directly, it's just something I observed as a parent. He would share information with us and be very clear about what was going on and what was happening. But for him, I think there was relief to be able to talk with someone
Yeah.
about my mom very frankly and not have to worry about measuring his words and trying to like cushion the information because
Yes.
as a parent you want to protect your children from things that hurt,
Hmm.
right? um, but for him then he could just speak very candidly and they were candid with him, but they were very soft
Hmm.
about their responses and very encouraging.
Hmm.
And you are doing all the right things. You know,
Right.
I can't say enough good things about them either.
Yes. Yeah, and to the promptness at which they responded to needs. I remember there's a huge oxygen tank in the den where her bed was, and she was hooked up to oxygen. She needed that the last couple of months, and she started to get nosebleeds. And
Mm,
so,
yep.
I just said, is there any way, do we need a humidifier in the room? And they said,
Mhm.
oh, we can put humidity in the air. I don't know all the technical terms, but we can put
Yeah.
that in her device. And I said, oh, that might help. So we
Yeah.
tried that. And I mean, immediately, like within a few hours, that came to our door. Somebody delivered it,
Right. Yeah.
and
The
no more
speed of the
nosebleeds.
delivery is
Yeah,
shocking.
it was. I couldn't believe how quickly it was. And I would have gone out to pick something up, but that they came
Yeah.
to us and
Right.
service.
Yeah. That is, I mean, it is certainly a case of understanding your audience.
Yes.
They take so much off your plate. And oh, you need pull-ups, you need wipes, you need pads, you need whatever. I mean, it would just appear.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and ample supply too. So
Yeah,
we weren't going to
right.
run out in a couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah. My family is big on humor, and we used to joke that, oh, we had another visit from the hospice fairy because there would be, boxes on the front porch.
Oh. Yes, they were great.
So, you had mentioned in our prior conversation that your mom was very planful. And now that I know that she was a reading teacher, it makes sense.
Mhm.
And she wanted to talk through what was going to happen and what the plan was and what she wanted.
Mhm.
So, how did those conversations go? And yeah, how did that all transpire?
Well, it was difficult for my other sisters to have her talk about her plans
Mhm.
for end of life.
Yeah.
And for some reason, she thought that, I could handle it. And I think I was able to listen to her because I thought this is a long way off. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to feel it yet.
Right.
And so every time for the last 3 or 4 years of her life, every time I came home, my visits were planned. Everything would be spread out on the dining room table, and she would just go by one. This is what I want, and this is everything was scripted and organized. And so she wanted all four of us to say something at her funeral, and I just said, Mom, we won't be able to do that. We will be too emotional, and we're women, and this is just
Mhm.
not something we're going to be able to do. And she just kept insisting. And so as it approached, she rewrote all the scripts, and they were a lot shorter, and and mine just had a few notes because I think she just knew that I would come up with something, and she just said, "Well,
Yeah.
talk about these things." And so, when she passed, I realized this was important to her. And the only way we could get through this is to actually present these to each other. And I thought it might be cathartic for us and
Mhm.
to hear each other's, and we kind of helped each other with the edits. So we kind of got through the really heavy crying part of it, so that
Mhm.
as we did it a few more times and practiced together, it became just something joyful for us to be able to share when we did for in the eulogies at the funeral.
Yeah.
So we wanted to leave that legacy for my mother, and we
Mm.
wanted to honor her wishes. And we were able to do that. And like I said, she planned the whole service out with songs that she wanted, everything, who was going to speak when and how many minutes they would get. And, teachers and those lesson plans. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So it was very fulfilling to be able to do that for her.
Wow. That is really powerful. And what I think as an outsider looking in, um, the fact that she wanted all four of you to speak and thought of each of you
Mm.
and what might be a good thing for each of you to talk about. Not only, obviously, is that her teacher training, but of course, as a mother, she
Mhm.
knew what would match each person.
Right.
And the fact that you all came together to practice it.
Mhm.
It brought you together, and in that time when it's the hardest to process what's going on, it was almost like a tool
Yeah,
for you each to communicate with one another. And I'm astounded at the planning and the thoughtfulness of that.
right. Yes. Yeah. She just wanted it a certain way and
Mm.
just knew the people that she wanted to celebrate her life. And
Yeah.
yes,
Wow.
and you're
What?
right. It was a nice tool that brought us together just because not only did we have to speak, she wanted us to sing together.
Oh,
And, we
that's
sang,
asking a lot.
yes, we sang growing up, but we haven't done it for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so we had to practice that too. So there was also time for laughter
No.
because we just laugh when we sing and
Yeah.
so for time for laughter and even in as we were helping each other edit their scripts we were telling funny stories and I said remember this and we pulled out these great stories that were just perfect for that particular sister to talk about with my mom
Hmm.
and
Oh,
that part was actually fun. It was
yeah.
difficult initially, but it actually was just enjoyable to be
Yeah.
able to do that.
Yeah. It broke the ice, so to
Yes,
speak.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think it also helped my dad to hear
Mhm.
his daughters be able to speak about her in that way. So,
Right. Yeah. And to see you all together, I mean, as a parent, the greatest joy
right.
is when your children are together and they're laughing.
Yeah.
Like there is no better time than that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a gift for him for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was the laughter together, but there was also the heavy crying.
Oh,
And,
yes.
I don't, just grieving is just so unpredictable. And so there might
Hmm.
be moments you're fine, and the next moment, you're just in a heap of tears. So,
Hmm.
um, it was nice to have people, again, back to social support. It was nice to have people around you
Yeah.
to talk to and
Hmm.
maybe one sister would be fine and the other would be not fine and they could hug and find
Hmm.
that support and yeah it was really a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. Grief is a funny thing. Um, I was talking with someone recently who said, I was so focused on all the things that needed to be done. We had to plan, we had to this, we had to that. And I was in the grocery store and somebody walked by wearing my mom's perfume that had like not even been in production for 15 years. And suddenly I had to explain myself to a bunch of strangers.
Oh,
That was the thing, right?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, those triggers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you had mentioned earlier about working with your sisters prior to planning what you were going to speak with about, rather, and in the care, and there were a lot of phone calls. So
Mhm.
when there are multiple people involved in someone's care, that can get complicated.
Mhm.
I think, among sisters, sometimes it's a little easier because sisters are typically very communicative
Right.
with one another. But was there like a certain point person within the four of you, or how did you manage the multiple caregivers?
That was a big challenge. And
Yeah,
again, I studied health communication and I thought, man, I've heard of these families who have a plan and they just follow this plan. And we just couldn't get a plan together, because things changed from day to day.
right.
But what we learned to do was whomever was, visiting with the doctor and had that firsthand information, they
Mhm,
would share out with all of us, whether it was in a text message or whether it was in a phone call.
mhm,
And again, I have a greater need for information, so I would send them my questions and say, here are
yeah.
questions. you can ask. When I was the one, because there were several hospital stays where she was in and out of the hospital a lot. So
Mhm.
my sister and I would come home and we would stay with her in the hospital to advocate for her to make sure that she could communicate her needs well.
Mhm.
And so during those times, I would text a lot of detail. I might even take screenshots of, the oxygen and that sort of the pulse and all of that. So they would
Right.
know it's getting better or it's getting worse. And then we did at times do FaceTime. So we
Yeah.
wanted to be on a community call. And so we'd FaceTime. So if the doctor were there, and we asked permission, of course, but if
Mhm.
the doctor were there talking about options, everybody wanted to be on that call and hear firsthand what was going on.
Yeah.
So we learned to do that. That was very helpful, but also detailed notes about the conversations. And again, you're right, it's so difficult because from one moment to the next, I could hear something from my dad, and what my sister was sharing was already old news. So his news
Mhm.
was the most updated. So we were trying to figure out who has the most updated news. So that was
Yeah.
a challenge. I'm not sure we overcame completely unless we did the FaceTiming or the calls, the community call. But it
Yeah.
was very important for us. We all had a need for information. And I think that's what helped us decide, okay, at a certain point, when should we come home? I had one sister who lived
Mhm.
in Florida and of course I lived out of town. So we would coordinate which one of us would get there and how long we would be there to relieve my dad. And um,
Mhm.
again, maybe they didn't have as much need for the information as I did, but like I wanted details. So,
Yeah. I'm the same. Yeah. I needed all the information. I wanted a plan. I wanted to know what was coming next.
yeah.
A lot of that is personality. Now I'm realizing some of it's probably also anxiety, but it was helpful for me because caregiving isn't the only thing you're doing,
Mhm.
right? You have your personal life, you have your own family, your
Yeah.
own friends, your own career, whatever going on. And how can I say this? It's easy for caregiving to snowball and take over everything. And sometimes that's the right thing. Sometimes that's what has to happen.
Mhm.
But when you're in a situation where it can be shared and it doesn't have to be all consuming, having that information helps you to plan and figure out where am I most useful
Yes.
and what is the best use of my time that will be most helpful to you.
Right. Yes, and the four of us each have different personalities. So we discovered what we could do that was most useful. I mean,
Yeah.
like me, I would be there. I'm the one that would, if the doctors need questions, my mother had a question or we needed to challenge something, I kind of took that on me. One sister was the party person. She would bring the party to the room, and my mother loved that, and she needed
Yeah.
that too. That
Yeah.
wasn't going to be how I stepped into the role of caregiver, but that was definitely her way
Right.
of saying, "This is how I can help." And
Yeah.
I may not be able to take over some of these physical duties that the rest of you are doing, but that's how she showed up. So,
Yeah.
so
I'm
depending
here to
on,
lighten the mood.
yes, yes, and she did. She brought balloons and donuts and, you know, and laughter.
She the youngest, just out of
She's the
curiosity.
oldest, so
She's the
she's the
oldest.
firstborn. Mhm.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm always just curious about, birth order and personality. And so
Yeah.
just
Yes, but she filled that role just that my mother loved to be around her because she would just bring
yeah.
laughter.
Yeah.
And I mean the rest of us tried to make her laugh as well, but
Mhm.
that was my sister Fran's primary responsibility.
The
Oh,
the laughter and the humor and the joy, they are so necessary
mhm.
because the experience is so heavy.
Yeah.
And if you don't find a counterbalance to that, that's where people,
Mhm.
I mean, it's all a struggle, right? Nothing about it is easy, but it's so much harder
Yes.
when you don't have that. So if
Yeah.
you don't have a jokester in your life, find one.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And one other thing that we learned at the very end, when my sister and I came to the house and stayed for a week at a time. Now, at this point, it was January, and I thought she's going to live till June or September. She passed in February. But one of the things that we did is try to bring in things that had been taken away from her. Like she had macular degeneration. So she tried to read, but I mean, she just could hardly see. So she had a little iPad that had 5 words on it, and she'd have to keep flipping the pages every 5 words.
Yeah.
So we tried to restore reading by bringing books to her that we knew she would like to read, and we would read to her.
Mhm.
So those were some of the ways that we kind of brought joy in. Maybe not necessarily humor, but we
Yeah.
brought joy in that way through, again, restoring some of those things that she hadn't been able to do for a while.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I have learned over the course of these conversations. I used to only ask about humor because that's the way that I deal with the world.
Uh,
I have learned to incorporate joy because not everybody pulls the humorous side of things. And, obviously it's not always appropriate. I've inserted foot in mouth many a time, but that we're finding the joy. And sometimes it's not ha ha joy.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's like a quiet, peaceful joy.
Yeah, you're right.
And whatever that is important to bring in.
Absolutely. One of the books I happened to find that had just come out was a book about Barbara and George Bush, written by their pastor, and it talked about their faith journey. So it
Mm,
was through that lens. And I just thought, she might like this because she loves history and reading about presidents and first ladies. So I
yeah.
picked up the book and I said, would you like me to read this? So we read it. And, I should have anticipated this, but Barbara and George Bush die at the end of the book. And so we're reading through this, which interestingly, their children read to them during their final days.
Mm,
And it
hmm
was kind of cathartic. But at one point, I'm sobbing and I said, do you want me to keep reading this? And she said, yes, keep going. And so maybe not joy, but there was a peace because we
Yes.
were kind of talking about things. She had stopped talking about death at that point,
Mm,
but reading their story and how peaceful it was at the end of their life, I think gave her some comfort.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and when you can make it a third party conversation, and you're
yes.
talking about what's happening to you, but not from that first person perspective, that is really helpful because then you can talk about it without talking about it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, something funny that happened is I had put a bookmark in the book
Mhm.
after I think the first one died, and my sister came along and read after I was there and had read the same thing I had just read. So that she had to go through it a second time, but it
Oh
was
no.
cathartic for my sister as well.
Yeah.
And my
So
mother
poor
didn't
Barbara
mind.
died twice.
Yeah. Oh, but
Oh my goodness.
yeah. And then there were other books that she wanted us to read. And she's that, it'd be 2 in the morning and I'd be reading. And I said, this is getting kind of tense. Like, are you sure you want like R-rated? And it was like, it was a missionary book where a lot of people were dying in Africa or something. And
Mm,
I said, are you sure you want me to keep reading? You might have bad dreams. She said, no, I want to finish the book. And so, there were that it kind of gave her a little bit of hope, to kind of have
mhm.
things that continued.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So when we had spoken before, you mentioned, of course, your mom passed, and then your dad had life after. And so, how a lot of people struggle with the transition from being caregiver to what does life look like now?
Yeah.
So if you're open to it, I would love for you to share with the audience uh, your dad's journey once caregiving ended for him.
Right. So I think like the first few months, I remember making the comment, if you can die of a broken heart, I'm afraid my dad, that might just take him. He
Yes.
just was just still grieving. And again, he's not a very emotional, wearing his emotions out there.
Mhm.
We know him. So we know when
Right.
he's quiet or some of the things that he would talk about, we just realize he's really grieving.
Hmm.
So we were on the phone a lot with him, made several visits, and he was turning 90 that year. So she passed in February. He was turning 90 uh, in the year after that. And so we
Hmm.
had a big birthday celebration for him with a lot of people and asked people, we wanted to get 90 cards, birthday cards for him. So that sort of gave him a moment of joy,
Hmm.
gave us something to look forward to. But I know that he sort of had a lot of cards sitting on the dining room table, had my mother's picture, pictures of her just for the longest time.
Hmm.
And that brought him a lot of comfort, I guess. And so I think he was struggling for a while, but people came by. They took him out for breakfast, lunch. He kind of got back. I mean, his routine. That's the one thing about caregivers is they drop out of their social life because they
Yes.
have more duties, and so they
Right.
don't have those social routines anymore. And so I
Hmm.
think he was slowly trying to find those, and 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 my sisters that live there, I have two sisters that live there, and they would come along and make sure they took him out to eat, and
Hmm.
he can still drive, but he was doing these things. But I think the one thing that really made a huge difference for him is he found a grief support group, and he's not one that would seek that out. So
Hmm.
again, it was kind of a God thing that he found out about this church up the road that had this, and he started attending that, and he would just light up with joy. I mean, it sounds sad, but all he people understood what he was going through,
Right.
and he
It's
just had
nice
the
to be understood and not have to worry about what people think of
exactly.
whatever you're doing or saying. Yeah.
Yes. So he would just like phone calls then were all about the support group and who he met and what they talked about and how much he got out of it and how much he was enjoying it. And he was really sad when it ended. And
Hmm.
I found out recently he's back in that group. So
Oh, good.
he has found that to be something that's been really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And he's one of those people that likes to help. He was a former pastor and he
Hmm.
likes to help other people. So I think he felt like he's getting help and he can give to other people, and it's he just had made some friends there, and
Yeah.
again got some good information too about how to overcome the grief.
Right. Well, and at the end of the day, people need to be needed.
Hmm.
So if he has that skill set and he is able to talk with other people who have been through what he's been through, not only do you have that understanding, but when you can lend that type of compassion to someone else, it's very healing for you as well.
Right.
And I can say that honestly because this podcast is that for me.
Mm,
It's very helpful for me to process what my family went through. And there's no time limit on grief. It doesn't go away, it just changes.
right.
Um, and when you have conversations with somebody, sometimes it sparks a memory that even though you've had a conversation a bunch of times, that memory hasn't come up yet. And it's like these
Mm,
little tiny gifts that just keep surfacing.
yes. Yes. Well, I think it's so great what you've done, Katie, in offering all this information, all of these resources. Again, back to my early days of doing the research, that was our hope at that time to provide lots of resources for family members who were going through that. And I just think it's so cool that you've been able to do that, and it just
Thank
keeps
you.
growing and you're serving so many people. So thank you for what you've done and what you are doing.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing your time and your family story. And this is just another way that we get to honor the memory of your mom and the love that your family had for her and continues to have for one another. even though she's no longer with you.
Yes, thank you. Can I share one more story?
Please
I
do.
thought of it. So my mother's birthday is October 25th, and we're recording this right before October. But um, one of the things I wanted to do in honoring her memory was to give books away to children because she was a reading teacher.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who was actually mentored by my mother, and my friend has written a book. And so for children in, 5 through 8 years old. And so one of the things that I'm planning to do is to gift each, I have a grandchild who's 5 years old. And so I'm going to gift that book that my friend wrote to each person in her class. So they have a book to read in honor of
Oh,
my mom. And we'll put a little flap in the beginning of it. But
yeah.
I'm just so excited about doing that. And I'm sure that brings joy. It helps keep her memory alive. And I'm
Oh,
sure other people have ideas of ways to do that, but this just came to me this year. So I'm very excited about perpetuating reading among young children
yeah.
and keeping my mom's memory alive.
Oh, that is a fantastic idea. And I mean, my kids are a little bit older now, but when they were little and they would get to come home with a book, either their teacher had given it to them for their birthday or whatever, it was always the biggest deal. So that is an incredible way
Yeah.
to honor her and also, light that fire of reading in little ones.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Cheri. And to everyone who is listening, wherever you are, home, on the road, or otherwise, thank you for being with us. And if you are in need of caregiving resources, you can always visit our site at carefulist.com. Until next time, thanks, and we'll see you soon. Take care.